Jessica Morgan hung a simple spring wreath on her front door, and for that two fake HOA enforcers dragged her into an unmarked SUV in broad daylight. Thomas and Karen Lawson weren't police, but they ruled their neighborhood through fear, false authority, and a twisted sense of control. Just when hope seemed out of reach, her husband found a way to fight back with the help of someone who knew exactly how to bring abusers of power to their knees. But wait until you see how this unbelievable story turned. And why, in the end, justice didn't just knock. It kicked the door down. It was the kind of spring afternoon Michael Morgan had come to appreciate in Pennycrest. Quiet, warm, predictable. Birds chirped in the oaks lining the sidewalks. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically across perfectly manicured lawns. He stood by the edge of his driveway, garden hose in hand, watching the droplets arc over his tulips. His wife Jessica was a few feet away, pinning up the new wreath she had spent the morning crafting. A bright little thing made of fox wildflowers and a thin yellow ribbon. Nothing loud, nothing outrageous. Just a simple welcome to spring. Then came the SUV. It pulled up slowly, too slowly, across the street. Matte black, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. No license plate. No stickers. Just there, like it had materialized out of nowhere. Michael straightened slightly, squinting against the sun. Two people stepped out. They wore matching camouflage cargo pants, black shirts, and utility vests that looked military at first glance, but on closer inspection were clearly store-bought. One had a body cam clipped to their chest. The other carried a clipboard with loose pages fluttering in the breeze. Both wore mirrored sunglasses and earpieces. But the most unsettling part was the badges, shiny rectangles of cheap plastic that read in bold, all caps font, Faux Enforcement Division, Neighborhood Order Task Unit. Jessica turned, a confused half-smile forming on her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Ma'am," one of them barked, voice clipped and rehearsed. "Your door decoration is in direct violation of Pennycrest HOA Regulation 14.3. Please step forward for immediate compliance processing." Michael froze, trying to process what he just heard. Jessica blinked, looked back at him, then back at the people before her. "I'm sorry. What?" "This is your notice of violation. Non-compliance is subject to enforcement measures." The taller one reached into their vest and unfolded a sheet of paper that looked like it had been printed at home, complete with a pixelated HOA logo and an illegible signature at the bottom. "This has to be a mistake," Michael said, taking a step toward them. "It's a wreath. For spring." "Sir," the second enforcer warned, now moving between Michael and Jessica, "please remain where you are. This is official HOA business. You are not permitted to interfere." Jessica took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere with you." That was when it happened. Without warning, both enforcers lunged forward. One grabbed Jessica by the arm. The other secured her shoulders. She screamed, more in shock than fear, and twisted in their grip. "Hey!" Michael shouted, sprinting forward, the hose falling behind him. The taller enforcer spun, pulled something from their belt, a stun device, and raised it just enough to send a message. "Don't escalate, sir. You're already on the watch list." Jessica was struggling now, shouting his name, her voice cracking. But before Michael could take another step, they had pulled her across the lawn. One opened the SUV door. The other pushed her inside. The door slammed shut. Jessica's scream was muffled instantly by the soundproof cabin. The SUV reversed fast, then took off down the street without even signaling, tires screeching faintly as it turned the corner and disappeared behind the hedgerows. Michael stood frozen in place, the sound of water still gurgling behind him from the abandoned hose. The neighbors. One man peeked out from behind his blinds, then vanished. A woman across the street looked up from her gardening, caught Michael's eyes, then looked back down, pretending not to have seen a thing. Even the Amazon delivery driver who slowed his van when passing the SUV chose to keep moving. Michael was alone, and his wife had just been taken in broad daylight under the flag of an authority that wasn't real. But nobody seemed to care. Not yet. The wall of indifference. The police station was cooler than outside, but Michael's skin was burning. He sat across from Officer Martinez, who looked over the incident report without much interest, as if this kind of thing happened every day. "They took my wife," Michael repeated, slower this time. "They pretended to be law enforcement and forced her into a car." Martinez leaned back, arms crossed. "If they're part of your HOA's compliance team and you signed their charter, technically that falls under civil governance. Gray area." Michael stared at him. "They aren't police. They aren't anything. Just two people in tactical gear playing soldier." Martinez shrugged. "I've seen worse. File a complaint. Maybe call a lawyer. That was it. No dispatch. No urgency. Just polite indifference wrapped in procedure. Next stop, the Pinecrest HOA office." Karen Hedges was already waiting behind her oversized desk, sipping tea like a woman completely untouched by the panic Michael carried in his chest. "Mr. Morgan," she said smoothly, "this must be about our volunteers." "Your volunteers took my wife," Michael said. "I want their names. Now." Karen didn't even blink. They were acting in the spirit of HOA regulation. Not everything needs formal approval. Sometimes leadership emerges where it's needed. "You're saying this was okay?" "I'm saying," Karen replied, setting down her teacup, "that she broke the rules." And they responded. Perhaps next time she'll consider her decor choices more carefully. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't bureaucracy. It was ideology. And Michael realized then he wasn't dealing with neighbors. He was dealing with believers. The self-appointed enforcers, their names were Thomas and Karen Lawson. Partners in marriage, partners in obsession. To most, they were just two faces lost in the sprawl of suburbia. Aging people who blended into hardware store aisles and weekend yard sales. But behind closed doors, they called themselves something else. The Pinecrest HOA Compliance Task Force. Protecting order, enforcing pride. No such organization existed, not in state records, not in any HOA bylaw, not even in the minds of most residents. Until it was too late. Thomas Lawson had once worked as mall security, a job he took far too seriously and lost just as quickly. After that, it was a series of short-term gigs, warehouse night shifts, parking lot watchman, volunteer fire safety. But none of them satisfied the need he'd been nursing since childhood, to be obeyed, to be someone whose word meant consequence. Karen was different, less controlled, more concerned with appearances. Her past included multiple complaints, mostly for threats, one for a neighborhood altercation that escalated fast. On paper, she was a woman seeking structure after trauma. In practice, she was the enforcement arm of their operation, fast to anger, faster to act. Together, they built their world out of fragments, tactical vests, ordered in bulk online, unofficial badges engraved by a trophy shop that never asked questions, a fleet of HOA warning forms printed on pastel-colored stationery, body cameras, flashlights, stun devices, zip ties, and at the center of it all, a black SUV registered under a shell company named Lawson Property Preservation, LLC, which claimed to specialize in neighborhood asset recovery. There was no office, just a P.O. box and a garage full of gear. They had no training, no legal grounding, not even insurance. But they had belief, and in their eyes, belief was enough. Their doctrine was simple. If real law enforcement won't act, someone has to. And in the quiet, rule-bound world of Pinecrest, they found a mission field. They started small. Notes left on driveways, inspections of unlocked backyard gates, a stern presence at HOA meetings, a warning to a teenager for leaving his bicycle near the curb. It escalated slowly, so slowly most residents didn't notice the shift from concerned neighbors to self-appointed judges. Until Jessica Morgan hung a wreath, a cheerful floral wreath, yellow ribbon, fake lavender. To them, it was a breach of visual protocol, a symbol of chaos masquerading as charm. In their report, which they drafted and filed in their own fabricated database, they wrote, "Subject has ignored previous guidelines and engaged in public defacement of the community's integrity. Action taken. Level 3 correctional engagement." In the space of a single form, they had made themselves judge, jury, and enforcers. Jessica Morgan didn't just break a rule. To them, she broke the order, and in their world, That was enough to act. The basement of control, the house stood at the edge of the development, past the cul-de-sac where lawns gave way to overgrown weeds. Foreclosed months ago, it had sat in silence, windows boarded, mailbox stuffed with weathered coupons and ignored notices. To most, it was abandoned. To Thomas and Karen Lawson, it was Sector 3, an asset recovery zone. In their words, it was a necessary outpost for re-education and compliance reinforcement. In reality, it was nothing more than a dark, unfinished basement in a home they didn't own, and it was where they kept Jessica Morgan. They didn't restrain her to be cruel, at least not in their own minds. They did it to restore order. A rusted water pipe ran along the back wall of the basement, and to it they attached a short chain with a worn, padded cuff. Jessica's wrist stayed locked in it for most of her time there, not so tight as to wound, but just enough to keep her seated, contained, as Karen liked to call it, centered. The basement smelled of mildew, old drywall, and whatever had been in the fridge before the power went out. A single utility light flickered above, connected by a long orange extension cord snaking up the stairs. 3 times a day they brought her canned food, never labeled, never heated. One was clearly dog food. She didn't eat it. Each hour, almost like a ritual, Karen would come down with a small tripod and smartphone. She called them correctional segments. She made Jessica repeat phrases like, "I am a disruptive neighbor." "A beautiful home begins with beautiful discipline. Order matters more than taste." When Jessica refused, Karen repeated them for her, then made her listen. Every video was uploaded to an unlisted channel titled Pinterest Ethics Archive. There were no subscribers, no likes. But that wasn't the point. They weren't making content. They were building evidence for an imaginary trial that only they believed in. Jessica spoke little. She conserved her strength. She stared into the darkness when alone, sometimes whispering to herself, not out of fear, but to remember who she was before this place. And somehow that helped. It was the 3rd night when Michael found her. He'd spent 2 sleepless days combing maps, cross-referencing city records, and tracking the faint GPS signal from Jessica's smartwatch, the one they must have forgotten she was wearing. When the signal blinked at the edge of Birch Hollow Lane, he drove there in silence. From a patch of trees behind the lot, he watched through a cracked foundation window. The basement was dim, but he saw her, sitting on the cold concrete floor, still, eyes forward. And then she looked up, straight at him. Through the grime, through the shadows. No words, just a moment. 2 people, 1 silence. But it was enough, because now he knew where she was, and they would not hold her much longer. The attorney who feared nothing Michael didn't know where else to go. The local police had waved him off. The HOA had all but laughed in his face. His wife was still missing, and time was a flame licking at the edges of his sanity. Then someone said, "Try Sarah Finch. If anyone can make them pay, it's her." He drove 2 hours to her office, a converted warehouse on the edge of the county line. No receptionist, no flowers on the desk, just a plaque by the door that read, "Sarah Finch, attorney at law, licensed to practice in 5 states, feared in all of them." She opened the door herself. 64, gray suit, black boots, sharp eyes behind narrow glasses. Her handshake was quick and firm, all business. Her office looked like a war room. Legal texts, case files, and a map of Texas pinned with red and yellow thumbtacks. He told her everything, from the wreath to the SUV, the basement, the HOA president, the video footage. She didn't interrupt once, just nodded, slow and steady. Then he showed her the clip, the one where Jessica was forced to repeat phrases in that dim basement light, eyes hollow but defiant. Sarah watched it once. When it ended, she removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly, and said, "They're not getting arrested. They're getting buried." The next 48 hours moved like wildfire. She bypassed local enforcement entirely, didn't trust them, didn't need them. Instead, she took the footage straight to the state attorney general's office. Within days, a grand jury was assembled. The charges rolled out like thunder: kidnapping, false imprisonment, impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering under color of authority. By the end of the week, state marshals had warrants in hand. The story didn't stay quiet for long. One local journalist picked it up, then two. Then the footage surfaced online, uploaded anonymously but clearly marked Pinecrest, Texas HOA Justice. The views exploded. Comments poured in. People across the country watched in disbelief. HOA groups distanced themselves. Legal analysts dissected the case. Talk shows brought in guests to discuss suburban power gone rogue. The Pinecrest HOA board scrambled. An emergency meeting was held in the community center, the first in a decade that was standing room only. Karen Hedges resigned that night. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet exit and a packed suitcase. Some neighbors went silent, afraid of legal blowback. But others finally began to speak. A retired school teacher told Michael how the Lawsons once threatened to fine her for painting her mailbox without pre-approval. A couple down the street said they were filmed without consent for a compliance report just for letting their dog bark at night. A single father described how he received anonymous warnings about curfew violations for his kids playing after sundown. The Morgans weren't the first. They were just the first to fight back. Justice in Courtroom 4C. Courtroom 4C was full long before the session began. Locals, reporters, HOA board members, even people from other neighborhoods came to witness what the press now called the suburban showdown. Michael Morgan sat quietly near the front, his hands folded, eyes locked forward. Beside him, Jessica adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, revealing the fading marks on her wrist. She had refused any attempt to conceal them. "They need to see it," she said. "All of it. No dramatics. No makeup. Just truth." Then the Lawsons entered. Thomas first, shoulders back, grinning like a politician on debate night. Karen followed, slower, scanning the crowd with quiet defiance. Both wore matching suits, gray, too slim for their builds, and carried themselves like minor celebrities waiting for applause. There was none. Only the sound of paper shuffling as the court clerk began to read the charges. Count 1 through 37, kidnapping. Count 38 through 79, unlawful imprisonment. Count 80 through 98, aggravated assault. Count 99 through 114, impersonation of law enforcement. Additional charges: conspiracy, coercion, use of unauthorized surveillance, psychological endangerment, misuse of community authority. The prosecution requested 5,124 years per defendant, not by coincidence. 1 year, the state attorney said, for every subclause of the HOA code they used to justify abuse. The symbolism was sharp and effective. Then came the turning point. Jessica took the stand. She didn't falter. She didn't tremble. Her voice was soft but steady, like someone reading from memory, not emotion. But behind her calm tone was a storm held tightly in place. She described it all: the metal cuff, the concrete floor, the flickering light bulb, the food she couldn't eat, the words they made her repeat over and over until her own voice felt foreign. "They didn't hurt me to silence me," she said. "They did it to make me agree with them." The room held its breath. "They wanted me to believe I was the problem." She recounted the footsteps above her, the sound of the tripod clicking into place, the hours spent staring at a blank wall to remember who she was. She ended with one line: "You don't realize how fragile your name feels until someone tries to rewrite it for you." There was no outburst, no gasp, just a wave of silence that moved across the courtroom like wind through tall grass. The jury didn't move. Neither did the judge. But something shifted, visibly, irreversibly. The defense didn't cross-examine her. They didn't dare. The verdict, the sun had barely risen, but courtroom 4C was already full. Reporters whispered in the aisles. Locals shifted on wooden benches. Even the jury looked different now, not just tired, but changed, like they had seen something they couldn't unsee. At the front of the room sat Judge Jonathan Reed, still as a statue, his fingers lightly resting on the handle of his gavel. He had spent years in courtrooms like this, and years before that in places far more dangerous. But even now, with decades of law behind him, he had never quite seen a case like this one, where the absurd bled so cleanly into the monstrous. Across from him sat the Lawsons, once loud, now quiet. Thomas's posture had changed. His shoulders sagged beneath his suit jacket. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. Karen, though, still fidgeted, jaw tight, still waiting for someone, anyone, to tell her she had done the right thing, that this was all a misunderstanding, that she was needed. None of that came. When Judge Reed finally spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words landed like stone on glass. You created a fiction. You wrapped yourselves in symbols of power, badges, uniforms, documents, and demanded others play along. But behind every badge there must be law. Behind every rule, authority. Behind every order, accountability. You had none of these, only belief and fear. The room was silent. You used imitation to destroy trust. You used intimidation to silence dissent. And when your neighbors questioned you, when they resisted, you responded not with dialogue but with domination. He paused, letting the quiet settle. Michael sat forward, his hand resting gently on Jessica's. She didn't move, but her eyes never left the judge. For these actions, Judge Reed continued, this court will not offer leniency. We will not pretend this was a misunderstanding. We will not soften truth in the name of community. He picked up the sentence sheet and read it clearly. For each count of kidnapping, 100 years. For each count of unlawful imprisonment, 75. For each impersonation, each false filing, each moment of coercion, this court applies the full weight of the law. 10,248 years of imprisonment without parole for each defendant. A whisper moved through the crowd, but no one spoke aloud. There was no gavel slam, just the weight of finality hanging in the air. Then the bailiffs moved. Thomas stood as instructed. He didn't resist. Karen hesitated, looked back at the judge, then at the jury, then at the audience, searching for something. Validation, justification, forgiveness. She found none. As she was led past Michael and Jessica, she shouted one last time. We were the ones holding it together. We were the good guys. You'll regret this. All of you. The courtroom didn't react, not with anger, not with applause. Only silence, louder than any verdict. As the doors closed behind them, Judge Reed finally lifted his gavel and struck it once firmly. This court is adjourned. And just like that, it was over. The red wreath they left Pennycrest behind with no fanfare, no farewell dinners, no goodbye notes, only silence and the sound of a front door closing one last time. Michael and Jessica sold the house within weeks of the trial's end. The real estate agent told them the market was still strong, but neither of them cared for the numbers. They weren't walking away from value. They were walking away from a place where safety had become negotiable. They headed 3 states south, no destination in mind, only a direction. Somewhere quieter, somewhere with fewer fences, both wooden and invisible. Somewhere where neighbors cared more about names than noise complaints. They found it in a small town near the edge of a lake. The kind of town where porch lights still flickered at night not because of timers, but because someone forgot to change the bulb. The kind of town where mail was delivered by someone who knew your dog's name. Their new house was simple. Low-roofed, soft blue siding, a screened-in porch that Jessica immediately filled with potted herbs and quiet books. There were no HOA signs here, no clipboards, no unspoken dress codes for yards. There was room to breathe. On their third morning, while Michael finished tightening a loose hinge on the mailbox, Jessica came out holding a cardboard box marked Decor. Inside it, tucked in bubble wrap and cloth, was the thing she had worked on during her recovery, every thread placed with care, every loop of memory she had chosen to own. It was a wreath, but not the one from before. This one was different, bold, saturated red. Not the polite red of holidays or berries, not decorative. This red was electric, raw, defiant. It didn't blend with anything else on the porch, and that was the point. Jessica hung it on the front door, stepped back, looked at it, then nodded, satisfied. Michael joined her. They stood in silence for a while. No words, just understanding. Later that week, as the neighborhood slowly began to notice the new residents, a woman from across the street stopped by during her walk. She wore gardening gloves and carried a bag of fresh lemons. Her voice was kind, curious, and without judgment. She pointed at the wreath, tilting her head slightly. "That's quite something. May I ask what it means?" Michael looked at Jessica. She smiled, just faintly, and then he said it, soft but clear. "Where we come from, wreaths mean survival." The woman didn't ask more. She nodded and placed the lemons on the porch railing. Sometimes that was all people needed, not an explanation, but the assurance that you're still here. The Morgans didn't erase the past. They didn't pretend it hadn't happened. But in this new place, they didn't live in reaction anymore. They lived in choice, and on that quiet street, under gentler skies, they found what no verdict could give them: peace. The lessons that stay some mornings. Jessica still wakes before dawn, not because of a sound, but because of a feeling, a quickened breath, a cold trace down her spine. Sometimes it's a smell, rust and concrete dust that never left the skin. Sometimes it's silence itself that brings it back. But the fear doesn't last like it used to. She sits up, breathes slowly, opens the window, and listens to the wind move through trees she once only imagined. Then she picks up her brush. She paints now, every day. Not flowers or still lives or the expected calm of country lakes. Her canvases are bold, chaotic, alive, jagged mountains, skies that melt into forests, colors that clash on purpose, scenes that don't ask to be understood, only felt. There's no order, she once told Michael, and that's the point. Michael found his rhythm too. He works at the marina, restoring old boats people gave up on. He sands them down, repaints them, replaces the hulls. No questions, no explanations, just hands and tools and the satisfaction of making something float again. He doesn't speak of Pinecrest anymore, not because he forgot, but because it no longer owns his voice. The world is smaller now, in the best way. Mornings begin with coffee and silence. Evenings end with books and breeze. Sometimes they host dinner for neighbors. Other times, it's just the two of them and the quiet. But one thing has never changed. Their front porch still holds the red wreath, faded now but firm. And just inside the front door, on a small side table, sits a locked drawer they hope never to open. They hope no one ever gives them reason to. But if someone ever knocks, if a stranger shows up with a badge that doesn't shine quite right and a voice too sure of itself, they'll open the door. Michael will smile politely, and behind him, beyond the wreath, beyond the warmth of the home they rebuilt, there will be clarity and readiness. Because once you've lived through someone pretending to have power over you, you never mistake that sound again. The war is over, but some lessons stay with you, sharp, quiet, and permanent, just like the wreath.